Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are all over the world. This is George Anastasopoulos, PGLA Technical and International Business Development Manager, and I am welcoming you to one of many, I could say, webinars we are presenting every month, trying to provide you information, knowledge, and competence related to conformity assessment market. Today, our topic is conformity assessment schemes. And this is a topic that probably not many people are familiar, but all the people involved in certification, testing, inspection, they are involved with conformity assessment schemes. And this is a term, this is an activity of conformity assessment that becomes more and more popular. So the decision to present this webinar was based on questions of many of you asking what are the requirements of conformity assessment schemes, how to control, and so on. So today, I will try to provide you some information on that topic. But before we start, a few words about us. PGLA Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation is an accreditation body, American accreditation body based in Troy, Michigan, established in 1999 by Mr. Perry Johnson, and we have provided more than 2,200 accreditations globally in more than 32 countries all over the world. We provide many different programs, testing, inspection, product certification, proficiency testing, reference material producer accreditation, medical labs, personnel certification, and training providers of certificate programs accreditation. So many different programs, and you are invited, welcome to check our website and to learn more about PGLA. We also have achieve recognition by many regulators in the United States and all over the world, providing the best recognized accreditation services that you need per specific applications in different sectors. Today, we're going to work and we're going to talk about conformity assessment schemes. Conformity assessment schemes are the foundation in trust and certification, accreditation, and regulatory conformity assessment worlds. And what are they? Conformity assessment schemes establish the set of rules and procedures to verify that specific requirements are met. This way, they enable global acceptance of certification or testing or inspection results, and they are ensuring consistency across conformity assessment bodies all over the world through the MRAs and the MLAs, so ILAC, which is the new, now they merged on the new organization, Global ACI. I will explain you about that process a little bit later on in our presentation. The conformity assessment schemes are here to provide confidence also to regulators, industry, and end users, of course, the consumers. And it is true that many professionals operate within schemes daily, but even they don't recognize it, or they lack a complete understanding of the structure and governance of schemes. So this webinar is designed exactly to provide you more information. What are those schemes, after all, and under what rules they have to be developed and they have to be operated. So before I start with official definitions and so on, I would like to give you two examples of very common schemes that most of you know. For example, product certification. Product certification is performed to different schemes. One very popular scheme all over the world is CE marking, which is the mandatory conformity assessment scheme for products sold in the European Economic Area, in European Union. And you can see CE marking in many products, in your mousepad, in your telephone, cell phone, and many electronic toys and different kinds of products. There are 27 different categories of products. So the description of how to achieve CE marking is a product certification scheme. Also, for all of you that you are performing audits, management system audits, and in certification bodies, again, either product certification and so on, you may be familiar with another very popular scheme, the management system auditor scheme, It is the IPC, International Personnel Certification Association scheme, which is the only management system auditor scheme endorsed by IAF, global ACI now. And this scheme describes how to become an auditor. For example, you know that in order to become an auditor, you should attend a course, you have to take a test, you have to present probably a demonstration or a simulation of an audit, and then you need, I don't know, 10, 20, 15 audits as an auditor or as a lead auditor to become an auditor, and how to maintain your status of auditor. All these rules are described on the management system auditor scheme developed by IPC. So those totally different schemes, and I gave you a typical example, but I have more examples later on product certification or certification of persons. Now, as I call it, the scheme paradox, and why at the beginning I said it is legit, because in some areas of the world, including the United States, in American English, the word scheme has sometimes a negative understanding. So it is associated with fraud or manipulation, but typically and technically, scheme just means in English, in plain English, a structured system or a framework. And the word scheme comes from the Greek word schema, which means structure, form, shape, or an arrangement. So in the let's say the definitions and in the vocabulary of the International Organization for Standardization, we use the neutral and the technical and foundational definition of scheme, which is a formalized framework of rules and procedures. So don't worry, schemes is not something bad, they're not suspicious. They are just the essential structures of trust used in conformity assessment. Many organizations used before the term program, so it is a certification program, which is okay, it's fine. Just the official word we use is scheme on its neutral, plain English meaning, a formalized framework of rules and procedures. Now, what is a conformity assessment scheme? So in standard 17067, and I am going to use the new draft international standard edition 2, the latest version 17067, which is under development in all my presentation, and defines also this standard includes the terminology related to conformity assessment schemes. A conformity assessment schemes is a set of rules and procedures that define the object of conformity assessment, identify specific requirements, and provide the methodology for assessment. So it is not just a standard like an ASTM or a BSI or just a technical standard, but it's a complete framework of operation under conformity assessment, a program, as I called before, of conformity assessment, either related to persons, either related to products, either related to management systems, inspections, testing, and accreditation. There are also accreditation schemes. So for different categories of conformity assessment, we have embedded different kinds of schemes. And you may ask me, in testing we are just using technical standards. What are you talking about, schemes? Yes, I'm talking about schemes because there is a reference. If you go to clause 787, statement of conformity says when a customer requires a pass-fail or intolerance result, the laboratory must use a defined scheme decision rule that accounts for measurement of uncertainty to make this judgment. So the logic of scheme is also involved in 17025, although over there it's not really very popular because in testing we usually we're using the standards and we are fine. But on the other programs, the other categories of standards of conformity assessment, the schemes are becoming more and more popular. And there are full clauses in standard 17024 and 65 and so on that they set requirements for the conformity assessment schemes. In addition now to the main conformity assessment standards, those standards I mentioned before here, that they are the standards to be accredited, we have also some additional standards that they provide support for schemes. And these standards are standards that we are not getting accredited to them, but they are providing guidance. So the first most popular standard is 17067. As I told you seconds ago, it is under revision. And this standard provides fundamentals and guidelines for product certification schemes. This is the version of 2013 for products, but the new version under revision is not only for products, it's for all the schemes. So it becomes even more important. We have 17026, which is an example of a product certification scheme. 1707, guidelines for drafting normative documents suitable for use in conformity assessment schemes, and so on. So this, you may ask me, of course, what is this ISO Casco toolbox? First, Casco is the Conformity Assessment Committee of ISO, the International Organization of Standardization, that develops all the ISO IEC 17000 family of standards related to conformity assessment. And in addition to the main standards, this so-called ISO Casco toolbox provides more and more standards to work with. Here they are. I'm not going to describe them one by one because the purpose of our webinar today is not to talk about the ISO Casco toolbox, but I included this PowerPoint for your reference, and the ones of you, as I'm going to call you at the end of the webinar, you can contact me and you can ask me for the PowerPoints, so you can have this very interesting PowerPoint that will give you exact information on what is the ISO Casco toolbox, because many of you may never hear of that before. So let's go back to our topic, which is about the schemes. So according to the new standard under development 17067, which is, as I mentioned, probably the most important standard that will be developed related conformity assessment schemes. All schemes, they follow a very specific, as I call it, functional approach. So the first stage is the planning and sampling. So we select what schemes we need, and then we determine if these schemes are related to what subject: testing, auditing, inspection, and they also include review and decision, how we evaluate the results of the testing or of the auditing of the inspection to take a decision. And then there is the attestation phase, that it is all the schemes, they lead to what? To a certification, to a declaration of compliance, or to accreditation if it is an accreditation scheme. So this is the 4 different main steps, phases of the approach of a scheme that we have to understand when we are developing a scheme. Now, the scheme must clearly define what is being assessed. So, is it a scheme, a program for the certification of products, or services, or processes, or a management system, or persons, or an organization? So it can be any of those. And as I promised you before, because I don't want to speak only in theory, but to provide you always examples, I'm going to give you another 6 examples. I think one is already mentioned, of schemes, conformity assessment schemes, that they are also endorsed by the global ACI. Global ACI, as I mentioned, but I will repeat continuously, is the new merged organization of IAF and ILAC, the international associations of accreditation bodies in global level. So they merged, and you may know them as IAF or ILAC. Now you're going to know them as global ACI. So the schemes that they are endorsed, approved by those organizations are many, but some examples, for example, is the BRCGS Food Safety Certification Program. So it is a scheme that describes requirements for food safety. Or on a totally different subject, let's go away from food, French of Free scheme, scheme for sustainable practices in the marine industry. It is very clearly described the subject of this scheme. Another very, very popular scheme on food safety system certification is the FSSC 22000 scheme. In a totally different category, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, has developed a carbon offsetting reduction scheme. The scheme I described you before, the Management System Auditors Certification Scheme from IPC, the International Personnel Certification Association, the most popular scheme on certification of management system auditors, or the very well-known also PEFC, Chain of Custody of Forest and Tree-Based Product Scheme, sustainability-related scheme for forest products and so on. So you see many different categories of schemes that they are endorsed. And if you check at the Global ACI website, you can see many more endorsed schemes. Now, what are the requirements that schemes must meet? Okay, they can mention or include sources like recognized standards, ASO, ASTM, EN for Europe, and so on standards. They can make reference to regulations, which can be legislation. For example, the example I gave you for CE marking, it has a reference to European Union regulations, the so-called regulations for CE marking. And they can make reference to specific technical specifications. In any case, and independent of the sources that a scheme is based, the requirements of the scheme must be very clear, not ambiguous. They have to be measurable or accessible, so easy to assess and verify if somebody complies or not, and they have to be consistently applicable. So if these elements are missing, then we are talking about a weak scheme. And when we are going to find out, I will show you later on during the validation process of the scheme, all these elements will be checked. Now, the standard 17065, the draft international standard under development I mentioned before, defines how conformity is demonstrated. So there are different ways to demonstrate conformity of a product or a service or a person through the scheme. So this can include assessment methods. It can be testing for a product, or it can be inspection for a process, or it can be a written exam for the knowledge of an auditor, as we mentioned before, or a welder or any other profession. It can be, and it should include a sequence of activities. For example, activities can be application for certification, it can be evaluation of documents, it can be the testing and the exam and the evaluation of the results and the decision rules, as you see next, and then the reporting format. What is the result of the conformity assessment process? Is this a certificate? Is it a card? It is a report. It can be different formats of reporting. In any case, the way to demonstrate the conformity should ensure that we have consistency across the conformity assessment bodies who are using this scheme, and we should have comparable results globally. And then this leads to a nice question. Wait a moment. There is not one scheme per CAB. CAB is the conformity assessment body, okay? The certification body, the inspection body, the personnel certification body. It's not only one per CAB, or it can be one scheme used in many CABs. It can be both. For example, a conformity assessment body, you can develop their own scheme and they can exclusively use it. But also, there are schemes that they are developed from third parties. We call them scheme owners, that they are available publicly and they can be used from different conformity assessment bodies under some requirements. It does not mean they are public domain. There may be a requirement for agreement with scheme owner and so on. But schemes can be used either by the body that they develop them exclusively, or they can be shared among different conformity assessment bodies under specific criteria and rules. Now, a robust scheme includes what? Defined object. As I told you before, is it about product? Is it about inspection? Is it about testing or person or whatever? Specified requirements. What are the requirements to certify the product or certify the person and so on? What is the methodology? How we will achieve these requirements? Okay. What is the decision rule? How at the end, for example, we'll decide that a welder is competent to perform weldings. What are the surveillance mechanisms? Is that once-off, or we have to check again and again? Don't forget that the standards of certification, they require continuous reevaluation. Either it is about products, or it's about services, and so on, or it's about people. Surveillance mechanisms, if needed, what are these surveillance mechanisms, and what is the governance structure, how we will control the whole process. All these elements together will provide what we call a credible, reliable scheme, and scheme that can create confidence to the market, to the end user, and to the regulators. So that is what we should always have in mind. Now, conformity assessment activities are categorized as third party, self-declaration, and I will give you examples, second party, customer-based, and third party, independent certification or accreditation compliance. Usually, third party is the most, let's say, provides the highest level of trust, but it does not only apply to that. For example, on the scheme of CE marking, the product certification scheme I presented you earlier in European Union for safety of products, the self-declaration option is there. So if we have products that they have a low risk level, then the manufacturer can self-declare compliance to the CE requirements. So it is not something we will not meet often. Depends probably on the risk level or the requirements of the scheme. But of course, third-party type of certification or accreditation is usually expected. Now, I mentioned before that the organizations who develop the schemes are called scheme owners. And there is another document, IF MD25, Criteria for the Evaluation of Conformity Assessment Schemes, that define the requirements for the scheme owners. So, I repeat once again, the scheme owner can be the organization who is going to use the scheme. It can be, for example, the certification body, or it can be a third organization, like I gave you the example of IPC, the International Personnel Certification Association, who develops the scheme for the certification of management system auditors that is used by many different certification bodies. So, what is the responsibility of the scheme owner? Simple, straightforward. Develop the scheme, but not only develop, maintain and update it. Authorize the conformity assessment bodies. If it's not your own scheme and it is a third-party scheme, how do you give access to your scheme to third-party conformity assessment bodies? And how do you ensure consistency? So, scheme owner, who can be scheme owners? Scheme owners can be government. We see many cases that the government says that those are the requirements for the certification of this product, like CE marking. So the CE marking in Europe is not defined by private companies. The CE marking requirements for the product safety are defined by European Union. And then they are implemented from certification bodies, the so-called notified bodies. And we had a few months ago, a special webinar about that, to use it. So the scheme owner in that case is the government. It is the entity which is called in the CE marking European Union. Also, scheme owner can be an industry association. So we have the example, the scheme for safety of food I presented before, and it can be an association of supermarkets that they will develop a scheme for the safety of the products they're gonna provide to their consumers, and they want by certification bodies to check if those products are safe according to that scheme. And of course, they can be independent organization. It can be a conformity assessment body that they develop their own scheme for their own usage. So those are the three main categories of the scheme owners. Now, who are the main players in the process of implementation of the scheme requirements, of the certification scheme requirements? Definitely the conformity assessment bodies. What are the conformity assessment bodies? They are test laboratories, they are inspection bodies, product certification bodies, personnel certification bodies. So though they are performing the assessments or the tests or the inspections to verify compliance of products, processes, services, systems, persons to the specific scheme requirements. It can also accreditation bodies, because the accreditation bodies have their own scheme in order to evaluate the compliance of conformity assessment body competence. So through the mechanism of accreditation, an accreditation body can check, for example, the impartiality, the competence, the consistency of the performance of conformity assessment bodies. So on different level, but both can be included in the process, the conformity assessment body role and the accreditation body role. And that's why the IFMD 25 I mentioning, this document from IF, which is now Global ACI, is a document issued for the attention of accreditation bodies, but the requirements are implemented in conformity assessment bodies. So all those elements I'm describing you right now, they have to be checked by the accreditation bodies, but they have to be implemented by conformity assessment bodies. So those are documents that both conformity assessment bodies and accreditation bodies should be aware. Now, I mentioned before, and I gave you 6 examples of endorsed schemes from the IF that now is Global ACI. And there is the so-called multilateral recognition arrangement, MRA, and we call it also MLA structure, in order to achieve the global recognition of the results of accreditation for different and specific conformity assessment schemes. Now, this structure, and I will present you in the next PowerPoint, is structured in 5 different levels. The first level of this confidence, let's say, pyramid, is the level 1, and it is supported by the ISO IEC 17011 standard. It is described over there, which describes and introduces the requirements for the operation of accreditation bodies. So on the highest level of our conformity assessment pyramid, we describe how accreditation bodies should work. The level 2 and 3 of this MLA structure are the main scopes, which is actually the accreditation programs and standards. For example, we're talking about 17,025, which sets the requirements for laboratories, or 21 sets the requirements for management system certification bodies, or 24 for personnel certification bodies, or 65 for product certification. And then at the lowest level, 4 and 5, we have the so-called subscopes of the MLA, which are the specific schemes. So the schemes I showed you before, IWC marking, or I mentioned the IPC scheme for auditors, or the food safety, or the ICAO for the airplane, the air transportation industry. All those are the schemes on the lowest level. So if you check on this map, you see on top, this is the table that presents this MLA structure with some examples. You see on top, level 1, 17,011 standard, which is the main standard for accreditation bodies. And then we have, for example, different level 2 and level 3, the standards related to the conformity assessment bodies, which can be 65 for product, or the very popular management systems, 17021, or certification of persons, 17024, and so on, validation and certification. And so we have different standards on level 2 and 3 that they will be used to provide evidence that the conformity assessment bodies provide a consistent service of certification or testing or whatever. And then we have level 4 and 5 that they set the specific scheme requirements, and those are schemes like, as I told you, Global Gap, okay, or it is FAMI, this is for food for animals, or it is the FSSC 22000 for food safety, the IPC scheme. I mentioned you about the auditors, management system auditors, personnel certification, the ICAO, and so on. So the actual schemes are the level 5 of a global ACI MLA structure, but in order to be accepted and included on level 5 of the global ACI, you have to go through an evaluation. It's not automatic. It's not like the technical standards on the testing accreditation, ASTM standards and BS standards or whatever, EN standards, that the moment that they are produced by a recognized standardization body, they are automatically accepted as validated standards for testing. In the case of the non-standard versions, we need to have additional validation. So if we talk about ISO 22000, it is fine. It is validation. But if we're talking about the FAMI for food, because it is developed not by a standardization body, but an association, then the global ACI, former IAF, they will do a special check, a special evaluation on the scheme. So the scheme owners, they have to become members of global ACI, and then they have to apply for their schemes to be recognized by that structure. So if you visit the global ACI website, there is a page over there which is called the recognized schemes, endorsed schemes. And you can find all those schemes consisting level 5. So if a scheme is not recognized and is not included in this list, in this web page, then you cannot use, before the IAF logo, now in the future the global ACI logo, except if it is a recognized standard like ISO 9000, 22000, 14000, or a technical standard for testing that they are issued by a recognized standardization body like ISO, which automatically are recognized as validated, and they don't have to go through the endorsement process of global ACI. I think that helps and explain a bit the confusion on which schemes are accepted by the accreditation and global ACI as endorsed schemes. Now, the next step we have to consider and remember is the life cycle of a scheme. Is the scheme is forever? Not really, it depends. So schemes follow a structured life cycle. First is the need, identification of the need of the scheme. Before we develop a scheme, we have to define why we need the scheme. And actually, when IAF before and global ACI now are evaluating a scheme to endorse, the first thing they ask you, okay, why do you need it? Do you have a study of identification of the need? Why is the scheme developed and what is coming to satisfy? So you need, let's say, an analysis, a study of to explain the reasons why this scheme is useful, who needs it, and why it is developed. And then you develop the scheme according to the requirements, for example, of 17067. And then you validate the scheme, which is a whole process. I'm going to provide you a PowerPoint in a while. And then you implement the scheme. Actually, validation of the scheme is that the scheme is appropriate to be used, okay? And then you implement it. Either if you are a third-party scheme owners, you provide it to the conformity assessment bodies that they will implement it, or if it's your own scheme, you implement by yourself. You monitor the performance of the scheme, and you revise it, or if the scheme is not applicable anymore, you may withdraw it. So it is definitely very important to provide evidence of the continuous improvement and monitoring of the scheme. So it's not enough for the endorsed, let's say, global ACI schemes, former IAF schemes, to say, okay, I developed, I validated, it's out in the market and working, but you have to continuously monitor and update the scheme. Okay, so keep it keep it always valid and updated. Now, what I promised you before, scheme validation, very important process. And for this process, two different documents are useful. 17067, the one under development, and also the IFMD 25. So the validation of the scheme ensures that the scheme is fit for its purpose, for what it was designed to perform, and must demonstrate clear objectives for the scheme. The requirements of the schemes should be appropriate and clear again. What is the methodology to perform the scheme validation? How do you know that this scheme is valid? And justify the conformity assessment approach. How you validate schemes, it's a whole study. I can make a few days presentation, scheme validation, but technically you follow methods like utilize or implement the scheme and try it on, for example, select group, or do a simulation, or perform an evaluation, for example, for personnel certification on a group of professionals. And you have to reply to many questions. If, for example, in the personnel certification, different people with the same knowledge will take the test, will they also get, they will pass? Or half of them will fail, half of them will pass. In one test, the competent will pass, and the other test, the competent will fail. So this is, you have to prove it. And this can be done through statistical methods, but also can be done through evaluation and simulations on actual sample. Also, somebody can ask, okay, you have an examination, and you say that the people will pass with 70% of the exam. Why 70%? Why people with 69 are incompetent, and people that they get a 71 score are competent? So how do you define the pass, for example, score on an exam? This is part of the validation of your personnel certification program. The same can apply for a product. If you say that this, after in the product certification, this specific device complies, what tests it has to pass successfully in order to comply? And how, for example, will you guarantee that if this product is produced on mass production, that product with serial number 1000 is equal good with the number one that was exhaustively tested? So how can you guarantee that your products in a production line are continuously complying? And how you do that and how you perform that? So, or you say, I may combine testing and management systems. This way I check that the processes are consistent. Or you may say, I have to test every batch. So there are different approaches. So all these approaches, either you will do by batch or you will do combination of management system and testing, are elements of the validation of your scheme, because your scheme should give an answer to how you will approve your products, how you will certify the professionals, and so on. So all those methods that they will be used, they have to be fair, they have to be valid, they have to be reproducible. All those are elements of the scheme validation. Unfortunately, I don't have more time to invest, to tell you the truth, on that nice subject, but probably we can have in the future a presentation on how to validate a scheme. The MD25 IF document also provides specific requirements for the evaluation of a scheme from the accreditation body. So the accreditation body, in order to approve a scheme, they have to be sure about a series of elements. The most important of them is transparency of the scheme. So you don't exclude. So you cannot say, this is only available to my members, then it cannot be accreditable. Okay, it is an issue there. There are some requirements that it can be done, but it has to be fully transparent and fully publicly available, the scheme, to be accredited, I mean. If you want to have your own private scheme non-accredited, you can do whatever you want. Evidence of validation, all the elements I presented before, they have to be documented, and they have to be presented to the accreditation body that the validation study is performed in the appropriate way. And you have to present your procedure for the governance and impartiality of the scheme and the consistent operation of the scheme across conformity assessment bodies. That's why I told you before that the MD25 is a document that is addressing the accreditation bodies, but the requirements inside there are affecting the conformity assessment bodies. So both accreditation bodies and both conformity assessment bodies should be familiar and understand what are the requirements of IF MD25 document. Now, before we finish, because timing is passing by, what are the risks of poorly designed schemes? And we don't want it. We want to have consistent results. So the first is inconsistency of results. So schemes can give different results for the same situation. So you have the specific product and the scheme sometimes fails it, sometimes passes it, or you have persons, two different people with the same competence that they want to be certified. They have to be both either pass or both fail if their competence is not enough. Loss of credibility, of course, if a scheme is not consistent and gives not appropriate results. Regulatory rejection, the regulator, if it is also required by regulator, they will not approve your scheme, and it will create market distrust. The market will not accept or depend on that scheme. Usually we don't see schemes that they go out to the market in the conformity assessment market with those problems. Or I could rephrase what I said. If your scheme complies to 17067 requirements, complies to the requirements about schemes that they are set for the main accreditation standards, 17024 for personnel or 65 for products or 20 for inspection and so on, and management systems 21, then the schemes will not be weak, because all these standards are developed in order to provide you the appropriate guidance and instructions how to develop a strong scheme, not a weak scheme. And then you have to be sure that you achieve a balance between flexibility and consistency, because if you make your scheme overregulation creates problems, reduces efficiency. And when your scheme introduces requirements, it should be also, those requirements should be reasonable and should be, the market who's going to use it should be in position to perform them. Okay, so if you say, for example, in order to approve the product certification for a satellite, I have to go to the space and do the test in the space, then it will never work. Okay, so you have to accept and develop a scheme that you will accept the limitation that the assessor, your inspector, cannot travel to the space with the satellite to inspect it, but you will do this process of acceptance of the satellite through simulations in land or in laboratory. So you simulate the operation of the product in order to certify it. So the schemes should provide reasonable and effective mechanisms, should be flexible, and understand the limitations of the market, the product or the service, or whatever subject objective they are applicable to. Now, in order to conclude my presentation, schemes are the core infrastructure of conformity assessment. Either you call it schemes or you call it certification programs, whatever you like, you have to provide the rules, as I could say, in order to certify a product, to certify a service or a person. So for this reason, those rules should be expressed in such a way that they are clearly understood, they are consistent, and they define what, how, and why conformity is assessed. ISO Casco, as I told you and I present before, provides to you a toolbox and the framework through the accreditation standards to develop good schemes and schemes that they are acceptable by the market. And now, through the process of endorsement of the schemes, Global ACI, which is, I told you, the merge of IF and ILAC, ensure the consistency and recognition of the conformity assessment schemes through their endorsement process. Now, I repeat once again, if your scheme is described by law in a regulation, or it is described on a standard, recognized standard like an ISO standard, then you don't have to go through the endorsement process of global ACI. Regulation, if it is regulation by law, or it is developed by a standard method through an recognized national or international standardization body, they are automatically accepted by global ACI. But if you develop your own schemes or your association develops your own scheme, the scheme owner is not government or is not an approved standard, then you have to go through this endorsement process. So always remember, strong schemes create trust, market acceptance, and consumer protection. And that's the reason we need them. It is the mechanism to support conformity assessment in the industry, safeguard the quality and the safety of products, processes, competence of people, and support the whole operation of a successful conformity assessment environment. I think this is my last presentation. Yes, this concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to reply to any questions you may have in the questions and answer field. Also, I would like to remind you that this presentation is available and I can provide you a copy of it if you send me an email at my email you see now on my screen. Also, on the organizers where you did your registration, if you ask from them, they will provide you the PowerPoint. And also, this whole presentation will be available in YouTube after a few days. So if you go to the website pjlabs.com, you see here on the screen, there is in our first page a button over there that leads you to courses, training, seminars, and there is under webinars, the button of webinars will lead you to not only this after a few days, but also to my previous webinars or other nice webinars presented by the PGLA staff. So once again, thank you very much. Next month, I will be with you with another nice webinar, and I invite you to keep updated, visit our pjlabs.com website, check on the webinars page to see the next webinar. If you like it, you are welcome to register. They are for free. And also you can not download, but you can get the link and get the previous webinars and that you are interested to attend, and also contact us to provide you the PDF version of the material in case you are interested to work a little bit in depth on the subject. I don't see any questions. Okay. So it means that there is a question. Okay. I'm going to read it for you. If the scheme is not owned by the personnel certification body and is owned by a governmental regulatory authority, is the certification body required to do scheme validation? Very nice question. Now, if the scheme is owned by the governmental regulatory authority, the certification body is not required to do scheme validation, but be careful. It may be required to do validation of the examination, because the schemes have two elements. During the process of personnel certification, we have the scheme that sets the requirements for the, in this case, in your question, for the person to be certified, but usually the scheme owners, they don't provide the examination. Some ones they do. Some they don't. If the scheme owner, it is the government, they provide both the scheme and the examination process, then no scheme validation required. But if they require you only the rules, only the scheme, but they don't provide the examination, and then you should develop your examination, then you have to validate that part only of the scheme, which is the so-called examination validation. So examination, if you go to 17024, it says it has to be valid, it has to be fair, and so on. So then you have to validate only the exam. So that's my answer. I think it helps. Okay. Where does 17025 fall into? Which level? 17025 is level 2 and 3. And the standards in theory, it's level 4 and 5. So in that level. So those are the two questions. If you have another question, again, I will be happy to reply once again. I don't see any more questions. I would like to thank you for your attendance. And I will invite you, and I will be happy to see you again in one of our next webinars. Take care, and once again, good morning, good evening, and goodbye.